Hey everyone, Raptorspank here, and today we have Metacheck, May 18th. This week, going to be doing things a little bit different. I'm not going to be talking about any specific decks, going to be talking a little bit about the meta and just the game and competitive in general, I think, because a lot of people have been weighing in on the recent Riot discussion, post, whatever you want to call it, on Reddit, and figured this is a good time to talk about it since the patch tomorrow is very exciting, but it has no changes for the game other than one new lab game mode and a bunch of cosmetic stuff. And the cosmetics are sick. I'm excited for the Dark Star card back. I'm excited for alternate art champions. I'm looking forward to that Cosmic Zed. I'm probably going to use that for whenever I get around to this season's Ionia Freljord Elusives gameplay that I do every season. So that'll be sick for that. I'm excited for that, but I'm very disappointed in Riot in general for the balance thing. I really love the post that they made. I'm glad that they were being very transparent with us and really just telling us what goes behind their decisions and thoughts, but I think they're really misguided in the way that they're handling it. I think there was a lot of community sentiment last season before the one major balance patch that people were asking for more balance changes, to just constantly be shaking up the meta, keeping things fun, because that's how things were in the beginning. And I actually think it was pretty fun. Originally, it was a little bit scary because, you know, a deck could be completely garbage next week. But the game, has a very strong free-to-play economy. So if your deck just gets nerfed out of existence, it's, you know, not the worst-case scenario because it's fairly easy to get wildcards back or to build into new decks. But generally how they did it, you usually could just keep playing that deck. It just wasn't going to be terribly competitive anymore. So if you really enjoyed the deck, you could keep playing it, and if you were good on it, pull somewhere close to like a 50% win rate in most cases. So I think they were a fair bit better with things like that. But then just in general too, it just kept things fresh and nice. And I definitely preferred that. I mentioned this last season when I was talking about how I wanted more changes and things like that because I was tired of playing the same meta every season going into it. And I think right now we're kind of playing in a large way some of the same stuff. I mean, Thresh Nasus is still incredibly powerful right now. There's just Aurelia as well that's been added to things. So I don't really think that's made a very healthy meta and a very interesting or new meta, which is kind of what they're implying. Also, they're just reading statistics really wrong. They're just completely making up their own truths about what those statistics mean. One that particularly sticks with me is that they talk about Aurelia's presence in the meta being a little high at 20.7%, but that she's new and has a novel play pattern, and since they said, well, her win rate's going down, so that means that people are playing her because she's fun. That is completely crazy. Like, that's so much reading into the margins or reading behind the lines. Like, that's a terrible way of looking at it. Because what it probably is everyone's been talking about how busted Aurelia is, and particularly Aurelia Zir, a lot of people have been talking about. So, when decks get a lot of this exposure, and people talk about them a lot, which they talk about in the own post that this is how things work, so they kind of counteract their own argument in that point as well, but people start playing that deck a lot more. But that's all people. People in every tier and every level of play are going to be picking up the deck. That's going to tank the win rate of a deck, because when there's more people playing it, there's going to be more people losing with the deck. And yes, there'll be more people winning too, but the problem is, especially if you're losing a lot, you start to look for the best decks to play to try and correct that. And generally speaking, it's going to take you a little while to get to the point that you're really good on a deck. And some people won't even get to that point. They'll, just play the deck that's best and then give up on it after a short while or something like that. But generally speaking, when a deck is at its best, its win rate's not necessarily going to be the best out of all the decks, because you're going to see some decks where one person or like a small group of people have been like no-lifing that deck for a long time, so they're really, really good on the deck and they can produce higher than average results on it. However, when you get a deck like this where everyone's playing it, the win rate's going to go a lot closer to 50% because there's going to be bad players playing it, great players playing it, and everything in between. So I think the fact that they're just saying, hey, her win rate's going down, that means she's just fun to play and people aren't playing her because she's broken, I think that's just incorrect in every way, state, and form. Second, I remember way back when, I don't even remember what deck it was, but there was a deck they nerfed because it hit a meta share of, I think, something like 16 to 20%, and they're like, that's way too high, like, too many people are playing this deck. We have 20% of our player base. 1 in every 5 players is playing this deck. That's a problem. That means every game you get into, like, out of every 5 games you play, 1 of them will be against Aurelia Azir. If you hate playing against that deck, you're really going to hate playing the game because you're going to see it, and you're going to see it constantly. And I've seen this myself in my own games. I play Aurelia Azir in every single session. It's not even a joke. Even in, sometimes I've gone on, played like 2 games, and I've seen Aurelia Azir. It's insane. You see it all the time. And I do hate playing against the deck. I do enjoy the deck as well because I think it's one of the aggro decks that requires the most thought, especially if you play the Misfortune variant, which is the one I've really been playing. But in general, it's kind of an aggro deck where you have to really think about your lines of play and what you're going to do to produce the maximum amount of benefit with the lowest downside. And so I think it's a lot more challenging than some other aggro decks have been, so I like that aspect of it. The problem is, the deck is just way too strong. Basically, it just kills opponents way too quickly, and it's really frustrating to play against because oftentimes you're chumping for no value. You're not trading with their units because they're getting out these blades and sand soldiers that are 2/1s, 4/1s, crazy things like this where it's like, it'll kill your unit. Their unit was going to go away anyway, so they lose nothing out of it, and it's just a really frustrating deck to play against. So I personally have been kind of hating the meta because I like playing the deck, but I hate playing against the deck. And so I'd rather we just didn't have the deck, to be honest, than have this sort of thing where, hey, I'll play against a different deck with it, and I'll be like, this deck's so insane, it's so much fun. And then I'll play the mirror match, and I'll be like, wow, this is miserable, whether I win or lose. And I do have a positive win rate into the matchup right now, but it's still just really incredibly unfun to play. So I just think that their whole attitude towards it is really bad. And that concerns me for the long run of the game, that they kind of think that that's acceptable. And like they're calling out the community about an aggregate 1% win rate, and sometimes people are crazy about it. Like if a deck has a 54% win rate and another one has a 53% win rate, it's a bit crazy to be like, oh, this one absolutely destroys the other one, you know, that kind of thing. But the problem is they're looking at aggregate win rates again. So what you really have to be doing is you have to look at win rates at the higher tiers, because that's where you're really going to see what a deck is. When you start eliminating personal play and start looking at, you know, how the decks do objectively in the meta. So I think just referring to the aggregate as the hard end-all be-all, which they actually kind of are despite calling out people for doing that, I think that's just kind of a mistake, because then you start to get those people where you're just going to, same as with Azir Aurelia, that they're really bad players, they're really great players, they're all playing it. Then they're talking about how, like, oh, a champion's viable because it has at least a 49% win rate. Now, maybe this is the competitive player in me. I don't consider anything under a 50% win rate, and I actually don't consider a 50% win rate, in my opinion, to be viable. Maybe viable for tournament play, if you're expecting it to counter a specific meta, and you're kind of planning to ban decks in a way to force your opponent into playing those bad matchups. That's when a 50% can start being worth a bit more. But if you're losing more games than you're winning, then you're going to go down in rank, and you're going to stay at whatever tier you're in and 4. Like, you're never going to advance. That's not competitive or, in my opinion, viable. That's not a deck that is. And at 50%, you're just going to stay exactly where you are. So I also don't consider that to be viable. Maybe that's just my own problem mentality-wise, because I do try to grind to Masters every season, and so far I've done it in the last 7. But just in general, I wouldn't really consider a deck viable if you're going to lose more than you win, or if you're going to do exactly 50-50, because you're not going to go anywhere with that. If your goal is to get better and to reach higher ranks, those decks will not work. So I think that's just really kind of living in their own fantasy land there, to be considering those champions to be meta. Because they do mention that they talk about, they're like, oh, well, 63%, and then they're like, oh, if we add in the 49%, we get all these other champions added in there, and it's like, yeah, but that doesn't count. And so they're saying that 74, which is not even 74, it's a little under that, but 74% of their champions are viable. That's just not true. A good number are, according to their aggregate win rates anyways, of the 63, 64%. That's fairly decent. But I think that their idea is just kind of a bad idea. But I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks. Like, should we be sitting in stagnant metas longer? Is this a good meta? Are other people enjoying it? Because I personally don't enjoy the mirror matchup, but that doesn't mean if everyone else is loving the mirror matchup, then hey, it's my problem, not the games or anything like that. So I'm just curious, does everyone else feel the same way? Is it anything like that? Or you feel like this is kind of rough and all that? Because I personally thought we should be doing, you know, more patches, more changes, just to keep things fresh and interesting, and it looked like we were starting to trend that way, and now very clearly we're not going to be, based on this post, and Riot has been kind of good about changing their opinion over time, so I think if enough people are frustrated about this, that they will change back to that as well, but it's just hard to say. I definitely feel like Aurelia's been pretty poisonous for the meta, but it's been a fun deck to play. I won't lie about that. And I haven't even really played any Aurelia Azir. I'm not even sure I've played a game of it in normals. I've been playing Misfortune Aurelia and still have a 66% win rate on it, I think, at this point. Like 20 some odd games. So I've been enjoying the deck. I just really hate the mirror matchups. And just in general, I'm running into a lot of decks that are frustrating to play against because I didn't like Thresh Nasus. Thankfully, we haven't been playing against Matron Control, and honestly, I think that deck probably should still be good right now. But haven't been seeing that, and those are the decks that were the most frustrating to play against last season. I hated Thresh Nasus, I hated Matron Control, because they're both just really frustratingly difficult to play against because they were so hard to deal with what they did. Because it's just like, oh, they just atrocity kill you. Oh, they just have 18 Watchers, so you're just dead no matter what happens. So I'm glad that I haven't been playing against much Matron Control. I have been playing against a lot of Thresh Nasus, which I'm not so happy about, but just in general, instead of talking about some decks, I kind of wanted to just talk about that post in depth and just what I've been seeing and how I've been feeling about the meta. So probably won't even post this on Reddit like I normally do with the Metacheck. And still going to be doing On the Grind this week. Good chance I know what deck I'll be playing, but we'll see. I don't think I'm shifting off aggro for a while, but yeah. We'll give it a good old try this week with the deck. But personally, I'm hoping we start to see some real changes. And unfortunately, now we know we've got at least 2 weeks before we do see any real balance changes. So hopefully Riot makes some good changes then. And I'd just love to hear what everyone else thinks about the meta and how it's been shaping up in the different decks. And do you think Riot's making the right choice on this? So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe for more Legends of Runeterra content.